And I think today you're going to introduce the shadow. Tell us how the shadow moves into the picture. Life is composed of light and shadow. And tell us something about the games that the ego plays. So,
yes, it's quite an exciting episode. The hint of the shadow. Anyway, allow me to recap briefly what we've been looking at so far before we explore how our ego tries to hinder us on the spiritual path. Remember, between birth and 2 years, we were still part of an all-embracing reality, made up out of different fields, but all upheld and supported by a vast underlying field, the ground of all being. We were totally at one with it, aware of it intuitively, with what later mystics would call the interior senses. Then, from 2 till 5, we gradually became aware we were in a different reality. And we changed and adapted with the help of a new facet of our being. We now call that the ego, who knew how to make sure we would survive in this reality. Some of us retain memories of that other reality. We were trailing clouds of glory. But for others, that memory faded soon in the background. And that, of course, depended very much on our personal circumstances, whether they be safe and loving or intrusive and even threatening. Now, the ego, this new part of our being we discovered, started building a field of thoughts around our original being. For our own protection, we thought, using the thoughts of others, not our own, but we soon made those our own. That thought field was a mirror of the world we lived in. So we would be accepted, loved, secured, and even perhaps esteemed in the eyes of the others. Well, it did its job well. It helped us to survive, but it also isolated us from others. And moreover, we became more occupied with this new reality we found ourselves in, and we couldn't see beyond it anymore. In fact, you could call us prisoners. We forgot our original being and the reality we had dwelt in. And yet, at times, when faced with beauty in all its various forms, the veils in our mind hiding this original reality would part. And we would suddenly see that not only was it within us, but it still surrounded us. We were still one with it. As W.B. Yeats said, something drops from eyes long blind. He completes his partial mind. For an instant, stands at ease, laughs aloud, his heart at peace. And this peace and this joy is what we feel when we see, not with our eyes, but with interior senses, the field, the ground of our being, the formless, out of which all forms spring into being, In other words, the kingdom of God. We have all heard in Scripture, the kingdom of God is within you. And yet, have we accepted that? Or do we forget that? Well, that's a question. Now, these experiences evoked a longing. We felt, as it were, that it was calling us to return to our home. But how could we respond to this call? Well, we started the search. And often a way home appeared. And for many, this was meditation in one form or another. And that's why meditation in our community is prayer. As you said, Lawrence, the simplifying practice of silence and stillness beyond thoughts and imagination, the stilling of the activity of the mind makes meditation into prayer. And that's also why our mantra is a prayer word, as it is in many traditions. And meditation holds the key, as we have heard, the one-pointed attention to part the veils between these different realities. But that's the rub. It disturbs the ego part of our being. It feels it might threaten our survival and security, and immediately start exceeding its job description and puts hurdles in our way. But you might think that I'm painting the ego as a baddie, but no way. We must not forget that it is, apart from its important protective survival element, which we need, the ego is another positive force. It is a force of energy, our rational, logical mind that tries to make sense of all we experience and learn, and we would be lost without it. We need it, but all we have to do is widen its field of experience. Meditation, as we've seen, enhances our power of attention that allows us to switch from our rational mind to the intuitive spiritual mind, changing our mind, in fact, from one way of being into another. And it does this by stilling the rational mind filled with thoughts. And that is not what our ego likes. When seeing the discipline we are about to embark on, it feels threatened and puts hurdles in our way, as I said. The first one is a good one. He or she asks, why change? You're fine as you are. And really, after all this time, you can't really change anymore. We smile and say, well, even you are not in a permanent state. Our ego, you're in a state of flux. You keep changing and adapting. You are never the same. And we smile and let that be, because we have also learned in the meantime on our search that the connections in our brain are very flexible. There have been experiments that prove, and I find this amazing, that when two people speak to one another, the brain of one can have a direct and lasting effects on the brain of the other. It's an article I read in Scientific American of Eric Kandel. So I'm warning you, Lawrence, we both are influencing each other's brain. Does it work across virtual reality? I'm not sure, but it does. And that's why parents are always very, very worried if the friends of their children are not the ones they like. Well, the ego is really like overprotected parents. They mean well. They don't want to have their children leave their field of influence. They've, after all, kept them safe all these years. But life is not all about survival, is it? We need to accept that life is about change and that we need to grow and evolve to be really and truly alive. And going in the silence is initially like leaving home. I admit that. But we need to do that to arrive at our true home. So we smiled at the ego, didn't make it feel bad, but we sat down to meditate nevertheless. Now, what does the ego do next? You all know that. You sit down to meditate, and what you are told is you will have stillness and silence. Oh boy, no, you don't. You don't. The ego increases our awareness of thoughts. And seeing your mind filled with all these thoughts is quite embarrassing as we realize how superficial most of our thoughts are. John Main called these thoughts the chaotic din of a mind ravaged by so much exposure through trivia and distraction. And Lawrence, you yourself quoted this story of Ramakrishna, who compared the mind to a tree full of chattering monkeys. Again, not very complimentary of us, jumping from branch to branch. The monkey mind level of distraction. Okay, he tried, but the discipline teaches us to gently watch our thoughts. Let them pass by without attaching any significance even to them. They're just thoughts. You know, here an image comes to mind which takes me back to my youth, which is always good. I remember hearing years ago about an advertisement for meditation. And on a poster, there stood an Indian guru in typical attire and appearance, and he was on his surfboard, balanced perfectly, riding the waves. And underneath the poster was the phrase, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." Well, we cannot suppress or get rid of our thoughts. They will be part of ourselves. And we've just got to learn to surf them skillfully. In fact, the Desert Fathers and Mothers on whose teaching our meditation is based, as discovered by John Main, stressed the inevitability of thought. Let me just read that little story for you. A brother came to our pastor and said, "Many distraction thoughts come into my mind, and I'm in danger because of them." Then the elder thrust him out in the open air and said, "Open up your garments about your chest and catch the wind in them." But the young one replied, "This I cannot do." So the elder said to him, "If you cannot catch the wind, neither can you prevent distracting thoughts from coming into your head." We have to accept our thoughts as a natural part of ourselves. And as we do that, they get quieter. Our thoughts and images and feelings are only a problem if we get hooked by them, if we get tempted to follow their lead. But here we have a choice. We have a free choice. We can either tag along with our thoughts or focus on our mantra. It's a totally free choice. Sometimes naming your thoughts, just thoughts, or just smile at them. I find smiling helps. It helps us to stay detached from them. And slowly they quieten and get less demanding. In fact, they are like that so-called music. I used to call it muzak in the supermarket. You hear it, but you're not really aware of it. Are you? So that is what you can do with your thoughts. And when we switch our attention all the way gently back to our word, we become aware of the gaps between the thoughts. And eventually, these gaps get wider and the mantra reigns supreme in the gaps. They are the doors to silence. In fact, the true nature of our mind is not thoughts, but silence. Meister Eckhart said, "Nothing describes God as well as silence." In our essence, we are children of God. So we are children of eternal.
Oh no.
Well, he hasn't given up. He definitely hasn't given up. If we manage to hold on to the mantra, the ego may whisper to us, "Isn't this boring? Just repeating a word." What a con. Variety is the spice of life.
Kim,
Yeah.
it froze for a few moments. I don't know whether it was recording, but it froze when you said, essentially, we are children of God.
Right.
Could you
I'll start again there. That's a good point anyway to repeat.
start in that sentence? Yeah.
Yeah. So Meister Eckhart said, "Nothing describes God as well as silence." Therefore, in our essence, we are children of God, children of eternal silence. And our thoughts appear against this matrix of silence. So whatever the ego says, we need to persevere. If we manage to hold on to the mantra, the ego may whisper, "Isn't this boring? Just repeating a word." What a con. Variety is the spice of life. Are you still meditating? Then it says, don't just sit there. do something. It wants us to go off and forget this journey in activity, amusement, and work. Well, meditation is the revolutionary discipline that asks us to do the opposite. Don't just do something, sit there. We are encouraged to sit still in silence, faithful to one thing only, to say our word lovingly. You think you have silenced the ego? Oh, no way, no way. It now tries a different approach, playing on our need for diversity, and says, are you sure this is the right method or the right mantra? Shouldn't you change your mantra? This one isn't working. And by encouraging us to chop and change again, the ego is making sure we're not going anywhere. Lawrence, I'm sure you remember that story from the desert where the farmer was trying to dig a well, and he dug a hole in the field and he went down, no water. So he came out, tried to dig another hole, went a little deeper, still no water. And at the end of the day, he had a field full of holes and no water. Whereas if he had stayed in one spot, he would have hit the water he wished for. And that is like our mantra in a way. Well, stay with it and stay aware of these tricks, because even the peace and silence we may reach can become a way in for the ego to tempt us and encouraging us to let go of the mantra. We may even convince ourselves that the mantra disturbs our peace. That's quite an important one, isn't it? Finally, he's getting quite fed up with us still sitting there. So he now says, well, I don't know, but this is, to me, this is very self-indulgent. You should do something useful for others instead. Now, this has often been an accusation thrown at contemplatives. But as we are healed and integrated because of contacting the silence in our being, which is us, which is the Christ within that dwells in our center, we start to act from that deeper center. And then if we do something, it will be truly useful to others because it's done out of love. There is a lovely story. I can't remember, I think it's from the Buddhist tradition. I'm sorry, I love my stories. I hope you do too. A certain Chinese village had been for some weeks without rain when they sent for a rainmaker. On the old man's arrival, he went straight to the house provided for him, and there he stayed without performing any ceremonies until the rains came. On being asked how he caused the rain to fall, the old man explained that causation had nothing to do with it. Upon arriving in the village, the rainmaker had realized that there was a state of disharmony, and consequently, the normal processes of nature were not operating according to their proper design. The rainmaker himself was also affected. So the old man retired to his hut to compose himself. When his internal harmony was restored and equilibrium established, then the rain fell, as is its natural pattern to do. So only when we are harmonious will our action be helpful. Well, despite all these thoughts of the ego, congratulations, you have persevered. And you will have moments of silence, stillness, and joy. Sometimes you experience something more than just a glimpse. And it is as if the spiritual energy, the divine around us, wants to encourage us. And whenever we feel discouraged and want to listen to the ego, all we need to do is remember that moment of grace. So there we are, nicely in the silence. And then what happens? We discover why the ego did not want us to go there. Because we have accessed a lower level of consciousness where the ego has deposited any experience that threatened our survival. Here are all the suppressed feelings, some of them perhaps traumatic, but let's see what happens. Suddenly, tears stream down your face. I've had that in groups, and people come afterwards and say, very embarrassed, I'm so sorry, I don't know what it is. And I said, no, that is wonderful. These are the tears you should have shed at the time when perhaps it wasn't appropriate and you suppressed them. Another feeling, common feeling, is irritation. And I tell my husband Shanker that you better keep your head under the parapet because I'm irritable. But of course, the secret is to note those feelings, accept them, but not act on them. Not act on them at all. There may even be anger. It's amazing how much anger we suppress because it's not appropriate. If your boss is being unfair to you, you can hardly start shouting at him angrily, can you? So you suppress it. Then comes boredom, caused by suppressing. Dryness, pointlessness. Up pops the ego. What is the point in doing this if you feel worse afterwards? Let the past be. But Eileen O'Hay, Lawrence, you remember her with as much affection as I do, in our community, once gave a wonderful retreat with you and her. And she said about these emotions that surface, she called them frozen blocks of ice. And she said, encourage them to come up and hold them up in the love and light of the divine, and they will melt. And along with that, they will release all the energy needed to suppress them. You don't realize how much energy we waste suppressing our emotions. But I love this image of our frozen blocks of ice melting in the love and light of God. Well, that was a little hint of the shadow, all these emotions coming up. But next time I will introduce you properly to him, and I will teach you to befriend your shadow, acknowledge and help understand him, and perhaps even dance with him. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kim, for speaking. It was a wonderful way of understanding some of the resistance that we feel, some of the complications, or some of the discouragement that we can find ourselves in on the path. And just identifying it and naming it in the clear, gentle way that you've done, I think is good food for the journey, and something we can draw on when those moments come. We look forward to next time. Thank you so much, Kim.
Thank you.